On this week's Bet the Process podcast, Rufus and I have on Kevin Cole, who is one of our favorite guests talking NFL. We talk about paradigm shifts in the NFL, meaning is passing done? Is offense done? And then Rufus and I actually give you some picks. We wander around college football, meander around the NFL. And with that, let's start the process. Welcome to another episode of the Bet the Process podcast, where Rufus and I are going to have Kevin Cole on, and we get into a pretty awesome discussion of sort of paradigm shifts in the NFL. But before we get into that, we wanted to do a little bit on Survivor. So Rufus and I are two of the six left in the Bet the Process Survivor League.
I've gotten it down. I mean, we had that bet. You had 3 entries,
Yeah.
I had 2, and I took myself even against you, and now I've gotten myself to level ground. You've lost
Yeah.
2 of yours. I've only lost 1 of mine.
Yeah, we shall see. Last week was tough for me because there were a lot of picks that I did not want to make, and I ended up choosing what was interesting about last week is I thought the Jets were going to be a really good pick because they played on Thursday night and because I didn't think a lot of people would pick them because they played on Thursday night. So that was like one of the insights that I had in picking them. And I
That's a good
almost
one.
wanted to make all of my, like, this is where I was like wondering, I was like, should I just make all of mine the Jets and just really go all in on that and hope that there's carnage on Sunday? And then I had Tampa for a while, and I'm like, no, Tampa's going to lose because they're the most popular pick. And then I didn't have a chance to like look at percentages, but I probably should not have picked. I mean, I was fine with Cleveland at the end of the day. Like that was a reasonable pick, but I was really upset about Cincinnati as a pick just because I felt like really about 2 minutes into that game, I knew they were going to lose.
Really,
So kind of, yeah. I mean, I just didn't.
they went down the field the first for that first drive, and
Well,
it
as
just
soon
was
as it's basically as soon as I saw Washington play offense, I was like, they're gonna win. Anyways, do you without
like,
giving too much away now, that like this is a really interesting time. Like now that there's only 6 teams left, do you think shift in your mind or
oh yeah, for sure. I think they have to, and also I think when there's only 6 teams left, like right now, I'm looking at who each entry has picked. And I think that becomes a big part of it as well. So I've
I'm guessing
picked
everyone has Cincinnati available still. That's a zig when
that. Yep.
everyone zags kind of thing, right?
Well, they haven't won a game exactly.
Right. That's how I know
And
no
so
one has.
I know. Same with
Yeah.
Tennessee, right?
I know who I'm picking this week. I'm picking a team. I already put it in. I was
So
like so
Jeff,
upset on Monday night that I had to put my pick in to make myself feel better.
we have both picked Seattle. I picked Seattle last week. You picked Seattle in week 1.
Yeah,
You
Seattle was
picked
a good pick last week, I
you picked
think.
the
I mean,
Chargers
obviously
and
in hindsight.
Jets. You've picked Chargers and Jets. I've picked Saints and Steelers. So I kind of like where I'm sitting in that regard, but I mean,
There's
feels like everybody so far.
we're sitting similarly.
Right. Everybody, it seems like everybody to be left has had to have picked teams that are not considered top tier teams because all those teams have generally lost.
Well,
Only
I mean,
one
no
of
one's
the 6 entries has taken Kansas City, it looks like.
Oh, so your Kansas City entry lost.
Yes, that lost, which is nice. Like my
That's good
entry
for
that had
you.
the crap teams has won. Basically, most people have taken Seattle, half of them. Yeah, it should be interesting. To be honest, I didn't put a ton of thought into mine. I remembered, about a half hour before 1 p.m. game started, I was like, oh, I got to put this in.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you
And
won't put one in this week and I'll win. That'll be good.
can
Maybe I'll
you,
win by
if I make a
attrition.
pick, can I change it later?
I don't know. You'll have to find out. Yeah, you can
Maybe I'll
change it
do that.
later. You can change it later.
Okay. Well, then
Yeah,
I should just do that right now and put a placeholder pick in just so I don't bungle this.
you should. Um, how
I
is
know, I know
football?
who you're taking, Jeff.
Why does it show?
No, but I just have a thought.
You can probably guess it. You want to guess it? I'll tell you if you guess it. You get one pick. Tell you if you guess it.
I mean, there's 2 options actually, but
I'll tell you if you guess it.
the Bengals.
You were incorrect. But
No,
I did think about that.
I think I think it feels like a good spot for them. Just I don't know. I mean, it's hard to see them. This
Their defense might be really bad though, Rufus. They could not get off the field in that game
Yeah, but
in so many advantageous
Washington didn't
situations.
punt against the Giants either. And
They
and how many fourth
Rufus,
downs did they
Rufus,
convert? How many fourth
Rufus,
downs did Washington convert? Think about that.
like two or three, not
Yeah,
that many.
exactly.
Right, right.
But how many drives were there? Think about that also. There was literally Washington had 6 offensive drives all game. Each team had 6 drives. It was one of those really interesting, weird, unusual games.
So you're saying that maybe their Bengals defense is underrated at this point?
Well, you said they might be really, really bad. Maybe they're not really, really bad. I mean, let's see what my numbers say.
Can I by the
It
way,
says
can
they're an
I
average. I have them as an average. Actually, wait, ish defense. A little worse. Actually, I'm referencing a split from last week. Yeah, they're not good. But they went from I thought that they were an exactly average defense going into this past week, and now I have them 1.44 points worse than average.
can I ask you about the unabated simulation on when Circus Survivor will end?
Sure, I have not. To be honest, I have not.
Okay. Well
I
then
just I
I
just
won't.
I just saw that tweet
Yeah.
and thought it looked cool. I don't know anything about the methodology.
You might want to look at the methodology. Otherwise, do you want to give me and Diggs 30-1 that Circus Survivor
No, of
goes the
course. Why would I do
distance?
that?
Well, that's what your
Well,
sim says.
I didn't price it. A, and B, even if I did price it, why would I give somebody the true odds on something?
Okay. Well, what
You
odds
know,
would you
if
give?
someone says, "Oh, if you
Okay, how about that? How about that? What
if
odds will
someone
you
says
give
something
us?
like, oh, if someone says something like, oh, this has a 50% chance of happening, and someone says, oh, will you give me even money?
Okay.
I'm
Well,
like, no, I won't give you even
what
money.
odds would you give? Well, let's do this out.
Look,
What are
as
the
I
odds?
said, you forgot already the first point I made, which is I didn't price it out.
No,
So
but like we can
it's
let's price it out. Let's say how you would price it out, right? Like I'm curious about that.
if I ran a simulation, how I would do it.
Yeah. Starting
Um,
with a 66% hit rate for the remaining 642 survivors and decreasing that hit rate
I
every
think
week.
I think you have to simulate. I mean, it depends on if you want a back of the envelope calculation, I guess, or a better one. But I mean, you do have the teams left have better teams remaining.
Okay,
But I
here.
do
How
think,
about this? How
but
about
there's
this?
one
How
thing.
about
Wait,
how
wait, Jeff. There is one thing that it does seem like. I mean, 66% seems a little low at the beginning. But if there is more, there does seem to be more parity this year. Fewer really elite teams, and so
how
if
about
that
this? Do me a favor, okay? And I won't give you crap about it. Do it out and see how different the price you get is from 2.4%. Because I'm curious what you would price it out at. And it's good content for you. You
Yeah,
guys can put it
no,
up there.
it's
Two
hard
different
to
methodologies to get to the
it's hard
same
to do
thing,
it
right?
right, clearly. I mean, to do it
And
right requires a lot of work because you have to simulate entries and stuff like that. And we talked about this, I don't know, last year when we were talking about I mean, it unabated about Survivor tools and stuff like that. And it just becomes like this massive web of things.
I mean,
But
clearly the circ like the unabated sim is good for doing something like this, but the methodology matters a lot, right? It's hard to do something like
well,
this.
you could simulate out the rest of the regular season and integrate that in. But then it's just about simulating picks. Who takes whom?
Right.
Whom?
Which is
No.
obviously hard. And
Yeah, that's
I'm
the hard part.
mostly just trying to get good content out of this to see like what it does seem like 30-1 would be a pretty good price. So it's sort of like what would be the
Right,
and
I
two
agree.
point
And
four percent, two point four
intuitively,
percent is allowing you reasonable vig on 2.4%, right?
intuitively, I agree that it seems like it has to be higher than that. And I don't know if this is one of these having not like dived into whatever into the methodology, whether occasionally you get
Divin,
something that's
Divin.
divin exactly.
Yeah.
You could have something counterintuitive.
Let's do a trip through college, and then we'll bring Kevin in. Trip through college. Well, how was college again
Yeah.
for you guys? You guys, it seems like you
We
guys
had
did
our
well
we had
again,
our
right?
first losing week of the
Oh, you
college
did?
season. Sadly,
Oh,
sad.
did we?
It
I don't even know how our picks that we gave out were for. I mean, you talked about we talked about Stanford and Stanford covered.
yeah.
Uh,
Stanford did
I
well
didn't Ole Miss cover? I think they
against
were 30.
Syracuse.
I think they
I
might have
believe
covered.
Ole
They
Miss
were
covered as well.
yeah. So we gave that out.
So
Um, okay. What
apparently,
are I was 4-2 on Kornheiser with my like I took Florida State last week because felt like that was and that
was that a
obviously
vibe? Was that a vibes pick?
no, it wasn't a vibes pick. It was the market has corrected. What did we say? Probably
Too much.
you said 7.5 points roughly. Probably you said you had a line. I mean, I don't know. You said it was like from week one, it was over 7 was what your line would have been on that game. I think someone else that we talked to said 17, so it seemed like there was a pretty big correction. Now, as that game played out, I didn't feel great holding Florida State -2.5 as Cal was driving. Florida State did not look, although there was a point in that game where it looked like Florida State was going to blow the doors off of them, and then they turned the ball over in their own
Was that
when
an
they were
evening
going
game?
for another score. It was like late. Yeah, it was evening. It was evening.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I didn't really follow the those. Oh, by the way, we talk about UCLA LSU?
Yep. We did. We
That one
gave
won
that
too.
out. We gave that. Actually, I think we must have given out a bunch of winners
Did
last
we
week.
give out
So
Michigan? Did we talk about
we
Michigan or
we
not?
did talk about Michigan also
Okay, so my
last
high
week.
profile ones did well. The other ones
Well, the
didn't.
ones that the adverse selection might have been what's the difference of adverse selection? Verse selection?
Yeah.
Good selection? Positive selection? I mean, there must be there is that not a how is that not a phenomenon? The difference between adverse selection and good selection. Anyways, okay.
Yeah, what there needs to be a term. Just like it bothers me that it's always bothered me that there's not an opposite of elevate.
Or about opposite of irrelevant. Oh, right, there is.
Yeah.
Or irregardless. Is there an opposite of irregardless? Regardless.
No, definitely not. Okay, so
Irregardless? Irregardless?
I'll tell you some very crappy football games that I like that you're going to get adverse selection on because they have not moved.
Love it.
And those games are Wyoming +4 and New Mexico State +9 and +9.5. Now,
These are teams that
th-
people generally think suck,
well,
right?
that's because
These
they
That's why
do
that's why
suck.
they're not
Like
moving. I
these
mean,
are
these are
teams like
like
the best team in of these four teams playing because Wyoming's playing Air Force, New Mexico State's playing New Mexico. The best team of those has a Massey Peabody rating of -15.4. So these are games that nobody's going to watch.
what do you make Alabama, Georgia?
Oh, is that a game this week?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the
See,
Chris
I
line
just
right
don't
now is
notice because it doesn't show value to me. It doesn't
I'm
bring
guessing you show
value.
a little bit of value on Alabama, right? Because would be my guess because with
I make it Georgia -1.
yeah, so you show a little bit of value because it's Alabama +2.5.
I mean, but that's not worth anything.
A little
Yes.
bit of value. I
So
did
I
not
wouldn't say
say,
value, not a over 50% cover rate, but not enough to beat the VIG. I'll put it that way.
but yeah, okay.
I mean, because after regressing to the market,
What are some other games? Are there any other games you show value in, or were there games that you bet that you moved so that people know what the verse selection is?
oh, exactly, right. So we took, let's see. Well, one that moved, Oklahoma State +6. It's +5 now. Maybe they're still plus six out there. I don't know. Um, there's a few like for example, we took here's one that moved against us. I'll give you that one.
Ooh, that's real
And
good adverse
yeah,
selection.
exactly. You're gonna get it. You're gonna get it better than me. And that is we took Colorado +14, and that's up to 50.
Oh, yeah, that seems like a
And that's like,
banger because everyone's got in their mind the Oregon game last year. I even heard someone talk about it on I think Pat 40 or something like that talked about it on Kornheiser.
and I
Would
don't
you
know
bet
why
that at
because
14?
we showed so much value betting against Colorado last year, and we don't have this as actually a very large edge, but
Well, but if you bet it at 14 and it moved to 15, how can that not be a reasonably large edge?
well, so we bet it. We do some model averaging of some stuff that isn't just like Massey Peabody makes it basically spot on 14, but um we there's some model averaging stuff that goes on as well, and some stuff outside that, and so that's why we bet it at 14. And now I wish we hadn't.
Would you bet it at 15 now? You would, right?
Yeah, but we're not going to chase that.
What do you make Stanford Clemson? That's 21.5. That was a team that you had some value on last week. They won, and now they're getting 21.5 to a Clemson team that is coming off a pretty big
Clemson minus
thrashing of a
20 and a
team.
half.
Okay. So what would that need to get to for you to feel like there was value there?
Let's see.
23.5? 24?
I'm gonna investigate. Yeah, we'd bet it at 24, not
Um,
23 and a half.
did you did you watch that Michigan USC game
I
or
watched a little
follow?
bit. I was watching all my bets lose in the early games, or kind of following along. Like I had who did I have? Houston, and they got absolutely destroyed. I took a UNC first half, which got destroyed. I had some whoever the team playing Army was, Rice. They got destroyed, and then I watched a little bit of the first half of the Michigan game, like the
I
first
watched
quarter.
my Miller Moss Heisman hopeful numbers pretty much go down the tubes
What
as
position does he play?
he's the quarterback for USC.
Okay.
He played fine. His numbers were fine. Like, but I feel like they needed to win that game for him to continue to stay
Yeah.
in the
Well,
Heisman
and that's one
race.
of these. This was a marquee game that a lot of people that could have built hype for his candidacy.
Well, because like beating Michigan on the road and putting up the numbers he put up, which were good numbers, I think would have really cemented him in that world. I mean, Michigan still has a good defense. Like you couldn't. I think you can't really argue that. But his numbers were pretty good. He did throw a pick six, which hurt obviously, but he had some pretty nice throws. And I don't think he was the reason they lost. I think the reason they lost was because you know Michigan had this one play where USC decided they couldn't tackle. Uh, anything else, Rufus, on the trip through college? Anything else interesting? Like ones that moved that you bet? You said Oklahoma State. Anything else? The
Let me
people
see if
want
I
to
can
know.
find something that moved really hard so people think that I'm actually a good better.
Really sharp.
Yeah.
Really sharp. I mean, do we still continue? What about UCLA? They're 20 getting 25 on the road against Oregon.
No, we
Sorry,
don't.
I'm sorry, 25 at home. 25 at home.
Is that 25 now?
Yeah,
You sure it's not 24?
it's 25.
No,
I'm
okay. Oh,
looking
this
at it.
isn't.
It's 25
Oh, my
moving the
scraper
other.
isn't working. Oh, it says last scraped nine because I have a sheet. It says last scraped 9/25, 2024, 4:32 a.m. So I actually can't tell you if we have I can't. So I I'm not actually quoting accurate lines right now. I apologize.
Well, that would be the first time. Okay, so A&M, how about
I'll
A&M?
pull it up on my unabated odds screen and
How
see.
about A&M and Arkansas? A&M is giving 4 to Arkansas. I feel like Arkansas has been a darling of the sharps so far.
We don't have a position on that, but uh, you know, I man, I wanted to get that. Like we almost took it at 3. We make it minus 6.5
Oh, so you
for
actually
A&M.
like the other side. And
Yeah,
so this
yeah.
is a classic, like maybe the Sharps have moved Arkansas too much. I'm pretty good at picking these games that like you have this potential edge in, no edge in.
Wait, moved Arkansas too much?
No, but like people like
Because
Arkansas, right? It's the Sharps have liked Arkansas.
I guess
Arkansas.
it
I
was
think
3.5, not 3. Sorry, earlier. That
my
what?
point is that like if you think the line should be 6.5, then well, anyways, you don't understand what I'm saying. It's
I
not worth
do.
explaining because it's not
I
that
see.
insightful.
It's an overcorrection. By the way, I just checked to make sure those New Mexico State and Wyoming games that everybody's going to be glued to on Saturday still are at the prices that I said they were, and they are. So
How about Washington State, Boise State? The Washington State's been a little bit of a darling. Looks like Washington State might have taken some auto mover action on BetCris because they're minus 113.
we took a position on Washington State plus 8.
There you go. There's
So that
some
is a bet,
value there. I like that.
and you can
That
still get some eights because I get no respect. Looks like
uh
Circa has 8 at the moment. So does Bet Online.
BetCris does not, and that's the Bible to me.
I mean,
Um,
we're not betting this stuff at Bet Chris, just so you know.
how about Texas Tech?
Yeah,
That was
Texas
a
Tech, because I took Texas Tech a few weeks ago.
mm-hmm.
Let's see, what are they? Are they 3 right now? Yeah,
They
we
are.
lean that way. It's not quite a play though.
It
I
looks
mean,
like it's going the other direction because it's -3, -103 at Chris, which would make me
ooh,
think that it's moving to a point
Circa
where it
has
could.
2.5. So we've been fading Cincinnati actually as well. So at 2.5, that's probably a play, or we're going to consider playing it because we've only really been playing early week mostly. That is market resistance, but I mean, we make it -7.
Did you do anything in the NFL last week?
I did. I broke even basically.
Did you just bet some correlated parlays or
No, no,
some
I actually
first
bet
halves
some
or some
sides. I
derivatives?
bet some sides. I just was like, I'm gonna bet sides on Monday and see if I get some line movement my way. Just
And did you?
and obviously I wasn't betting much. It was because the previous week I had, and it was honestly pretty neutral. Maybe a
So
little bit.
are you gonna bet NFL again this week?
I did. Betting small, but I bet a little bit. For example, I took some Minnesota +3 -120. Where's that now? Pull it up. Okay.
+2.5. So you got some value there.
Well, see, I'm just taking like best prices in the
Is Jordan
market.
Love back? Is Jordan Love back this week? He must
See,
be with that line.
he's expected to be back clearly based on that
Yeah.
line, and but nothing's announced yet. So, and Sam Darnold is, I mean, was got injured, but is supposed to play as well.
I mean, I like the Vikings there at 3 for sure. I mean, now like Jordan Love uncertainty, the Vikings I feel like are still a bit underrated.
They're a good team.
Because people just can't like grok that this is real or not.
Let's see what else. I played a little Indy +1.5 +106.
Indy +1.5 +106.
That was the best price at the time, and it's much like right now the best price is +1.5. It says +1. Wait, on unabated odds screen, the best
It's +2 now.
is
Indy.
-1.5 plus -1.5 +116 at Profit Exchange is the best price that I'm seeing. But
I see
that's
+2 +2 -115.
right with plus right, which is
Right.
substantially worse. But
Yeah.
I took some Rams +3 -115. You can get a little better than that now.
Is that because you don't know if anyone's injured?
That's because it was the best price
No, I'm
that
just
was out
kidding.
there.
I'm just kidding. Oh, you just took it because it was an off-market price?
Well, no, because I Massey Peabody makes the Rams like a 0.8 point favorite there because we really don't like Caleb Williams and rookie quarterbacks, as you know.
Yeah. All right. Well,
That's what I got.
that's what we got. Let's welcome in Kevin Cole, and we'll all talk to you guys again next week. So good luck on all your bets, and you can listen to me on the Tony Kornheiser show bright and early Friday morning. So let's welcome in Kevin Cole. We now welcome in Kevin Cole to the Bet the Process podcast. Kevin is one of our favorite guests. I won't say what number because we've been getting into a lot of trouble right now with our qualifying numbers of top 100 versus top 10 versus top 5. But wanted to start and talk about what's new with you going into this NFL season. You mentioned to me that you were sort of dreading the NFL season, but now you're into the rhythm. So my guess is in the off season you get to do a lot of like exploratory work, which is kind of fun. What was the most insightful thing that you kind of came up with in the off season, and how has that played out in the NFL so far this year?
Well, this season I actually probably did less NFL work during the off season. I did podcasting mostly. In prior off seasons, I had done a series on what I called the QB GOAT series, which was trying to quantify going all the way back to basically what would be considered the quote unquote modern NFL. And it's really a long time ago. We're talking about the 1950s till today, quantifying those quarterbacks. So that was pretty insightful. This summer actually was doing some work in some other sports. I've started to get into soccer analytics as much as I can. And it's funny because I feel like I'm one of the the football guys almost when it comes to soccer analytics by saying, "Oh man, this is really tough. Like you really can't just look at the numbers and figure out this sport," which maybe gives me a little perspective on NFL football, where I feel like a lot of people say that, but I think the numbers work out a lot better for the NFL actually, and maybe that's some insight that I got from looking at other sports.
Do you think that's a function of you not knowing the sport as well, or you being new to the sport, or is that because
No.
I I mean, so what do you attribute that to? Lack of real data, or what do you?
I mean, it's a different game too, right? I mean, like it's a more continuous game, which
Yeah,
makes it
yeah.
harder to have like when you have discrete events like you do in baseball and football for that matter, it's much easier to quantify.
Yeah. I mean, it really is that more than anything else. I mean, for instance, there's been work in soccer where they try to look at it on a discrete event type of basis. In other words, like having the ball at a certain location after a pass, from one pass to another. Now you have the ball in a new location. How much is it worth? The problem is it's too intertwined to really like anytime you pass backwards, models, at least early models in this manner would tell you you're losing value there. So maybe there's some similarity in the fact that you could say running the ball. People would also say, well, you're doing something that's inefficient to set up something that's more efficient later on. So there's part of that, but it's just harder to measure and to really lay it out. And plus, I think offense and quarterback play is so important in the NFL that it helps that you can let the other stuff kind of glaze over a little bit and try to understand it and try to measure it. But if you're just really good at figuring out offensive play and quarterback play, that can make a really big difference where there's not the equivalent in just one player when it comes to some other sports.
Soccer, by the way, the approach you're outlining of sort of the expectation in areas that's the sort of approach we took. I had a soccer analytics outfit for a little while that is now defunct. But if you think about the passing back, it's interesting because it's so context dependent, and you basically need to know the positioning of all the other defenders. And so it becomes it becomes a much more difficult problem to model, clearly.
Yeah, you have
And
to
you
know the
have so
positioning, you have to
few.
know the quality and the skills
Yeah.
of the other players. You have to know like certain types of passes are good depending upon whether you have another pass to a different type of striker. There's all kinds of things going on
It's
there.
like linkages, right? It's like this
Yes.
particular move, almost like a like maneuver or something like that. But also, you just have so few observations of like the outcome variable as well, a
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Could you create like a Markov model, which basically attributes value to every individual thing that somebody does, with
That's
knowing kind
exactly
of,
what. Yeah,
okay,
that was our attempt.
I
Yeah.
think it was God, I can't remember her name now, but she worked for a Arsenal bought a stats company and she's married to another guy
yeah,
who
Sarah
does
Rudd,
stats.
Sarah Rudd.
Sarah Rudd, yeah. So
Yeah,
that was her,
we've
I
had
think,
her on the
thing.
podcast. She's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, so I think that Markov, I think that was her thing. And we're talking about a long time ago. We're talking about, more than a decade ago, probably,
Right.
that she initially came out with that. And then, she had one of these blogs somewhere and got hired. And then that was, wiped off the face of the earth, all the research she had done. But that was public, I think. I think she had done that initially and was one of the first people to do it, at least publicly.
Okay, let's move on to real football and let's talk about the NFL so far this year. Um, every year, I feel like 3 games in, 4 games in, there's alarming um, insights based on what's happened so far this year. There's sometimes signal, there's sometimes noise. Um, the alarming insight that I'm assuming that everyone will be talking about now is the death of quarterback play, the death of scoring. Defenses are too good. Cover two is ruining the game. Is this the 3 week insight? Have I nailed it? And is there truth to it? What say you, Kevin Cole?
Yeah, I think it is the 3 week insight. But the reason that maybe a little uncharacteristically I'm buying the fact that this is a real thing is that it is a trend that we've seen since 2020. So essentially there was a peak in passing efficiency and scoring, all that sort of stuff in 2020. So it's not just been a 3 week kind of phenomenon. It's maybe accelerating a bit to the downside over this year for the first 3 weeks versus what we've seen in prior weeks. But it is something where now we're going into year 4 of a decline. And I think because of that, along with the actual real meaningful scheme changes that we've seen defensively. And what I would say, it's just kind of like a mentality of focus change defensively, at least anecdotally, that we're hearing from defensive coordinators. I think it is a real thing. And I think that it's going to stick at least the rest of the season until offenses can figure out how to innovate out of it.
What is that philosophical change, just to be explicit?
It's really, it sounds so silly, right? But it really is saying we're not going to change what we're doing to stop like these lower value running plays. I mean, for instance, in the past, like, and people will still say it today as if it's going to work. They'll say, you know what you do? If a team's running cover 2 and they won't let you do really valuable stuff, you run the ball, which is not actually like how you want to generate a lot of value. You run the ball, that will force them to, because they'll be like, I can't keep on giving up these 5-yard runs over and over again. This doesn't feel good. We got to stop the run. Stopping the run is the most important thing. It's our focus. They'll bring a safety in, and then you'll actually do the valuable stuff and throw over the top of them. Well, what if defenses say, you know what, we're not falling for that. We're not gonna bring the safety in. We're gonna accept the fact that you're gonna get these running plays, and then if you run all the way down the field on us on the first drive, we're going to say, okay, well, let's see you do it again, because you're going to have to convert third downs. It's not going to work perfectly, even if you can do it. And I think defenses have started to realize that they don't have to play along in this game. If they're running a lot, if they have a formation, which would normally in the past dictate a more pass friendly defense, don't allow them to dictate to you as much.
Did you, Kevin, did you watch the Washington Cincinnati game on Monday?
I saw it in spurts. I didn't catch the end of it, but
it was, I mean, watching the Washington defense, it felt like Cincinnati was just getting like, 7-yard rush, like here, like it was like 7 or 8 yards practically every play at will. And it felt like, I mean, Washington just doesn't have a good defense also,
but pretty bad against the pass.
It made you think of that. Right. But at the same time, it was like, they weren't giving up the big play, and they made stops in the red zone. And I guess when you score touchdowns basically every possession yourself, that works. But was that kind of I mean, as someone that's not an expert in like the X's and O's of football, I was curious if Washington was essentially playing a particular style, saying we're going to give up these shorter plays, or it was just basically flat out incompetence.
Yeah, I don't know. When it comes to the Commanders, it might be a combination of both, because I mean, I have them as the worst defense in the NFL, so I'm not quite sure. But I think also a reason why there's some belief that this is a real thing is that some of the thematic changes are things we've seen in other sports. I mean, for instance, like we saw it on, and we also kind of saw it on offense first in the NFL before now going over to defense. I think there's an idea of if you look at like success rate versus average value on a per play basis, there's something very attractive about being successful on a play-by-play basis that coaches generally, and again, if we go to the NBA, like again, you're making a 2-pointer 50% of the time feels better in some ways than making a 3-pointer 40% of the time, even though you're not scoring more points. And there's something to that. Same thing when it came to offensively, like success rates are roughly equal between running and passing the ball. You're not getting 0 yards nearly as often, or negative yards when you're running the ball. So that felt a little bit better. It gave yourself a chance on third down where you feel like you didn't have a chance if you were in third and long, things like that. I mean, I think those are also true defensively. And basically the spread offense coming to the NFL and just broke defenses so badly. You had to put guys back there to stop this. And I think they started to gather evidence and say, oh, you know what? We're putting more safeties back there. We're actually not getting killed on the ground the way we thought we would be. We're not giving up explosive runs probably nearly as often, because we actually have guys away from the line of scrimmage who can make tackles down the field. We're getting less tackles behind the line of scrimmage, but that's okay. Look, scoring's down. Like, we're getting this evidence. And I think if analytics does anything, it doesn't necessarily tell coaches exactly what to do, but it does give them a more discernible and faster feedback loop, which then strategies start to become universal quickly. And I think that's what we're seeing defensively, is this has really shifted to become a universal type of strategy to stop NFL offenses. And that's why the trend continues to go down over the years.
From the numbers that you've seen, or the trends you've seen so far this year, which teams are buying into this, you know, the most, and which teams do you think are still resistant to this? And it is interesting because there is obviously still like some common or narratives around how running the ball is makes you successful. You know, the Saints' success in that one game. Everyone talked about how much rushing yards they had, and it felt like we're back in like the 1980s before the hidden game of football or before Aaron Schatz did his work. But are there, and again, we are a betting podcast at some level. Are there teams you think that are so stubborn to this that their philosophical approach is broken and they will be left behind this year?
I mean, honestly, I'm not quite as hip to what defenses are doing necessarily than something pretty easily where you can see offenses who can, choose exactly what they want to do. It's also harder to kind of get information on defensive coverages because not only is it just not readily available on a play-by-play basis and other places where you can go get it, but sometimes the classifications don't really say exactly what they're doing. So, I mean, I think the key really is though that
How about this question? Is there a metric or set of metrics that we can look at early on that you think will be predictive of a team that is, like, can we create some context-based run pass splits that kind of like, you know what I mean, or something like where you're allowing a lot of success on runs and early down. I don't know. Like it's that, you know what I'm saying? Is there some way to
yeah.
like tease out a philosophical approach from the data? Because ultimately, if we believe we're seeing like a paradigm shift, there will be some teams that are left behind and that will be behind this curve. And theoretically, if the market is slow to adjust to that, does that give you some alpha?
Yeah, it's possible. But again, I think that with the offensive defensive thing, I mean, for instance, you can do pass or run rates versus expectation. You can build, if you have it, again, it's hard to get, what sort of coverages teams are facing. Because it used to be very much a binary sort of thing where, oh, you see two high safeties and you check into a run or something like that. So you could check to see how often teams are really doing that. But it's really like offense, again, is controlling those things a bit more. And maybe you could try to tease out on the other end and say, okay, which defenses are teams running it at a higher rate than you would expect based upon the normal contextual factors like down, distance, field position, score differential, all those sorts of things. Which teams are they running more against? And maybe that means that defense is doing something better, in other words, to attract teams to do that. The problem is that's highly influenced by which offenses you're facing. I mean, they're the ones choosing whether to run or not. And ultimately, that's something that they may do no matter what you're showing them. So I think, again, we have a better read, at least this early in the season, on what offenses are doing versus what defenses are doing.
Okay,
Almost like this
so
stuff is really complex.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I mean, it is weird though, because I do think we can have an impulse to say it's early in the season, it's 3 weeks in, it's noise usually because that's how things usually are. But then you're gonna miss when there really is like a structural dynamic shift to the NFL, and I think that did happen post 2020. So I don't want to write it off. Also,
So then what is our solution? Like we finished 2024-25. The Chiefs win the Super Bowl again for their three-peat. Everyone's now kind of going back into the lab. Does the NFL make rule changes because they want more scoring? What do offensive coordinators cook up? What do the Mike McDaniels and the Kyle Shanahans do to try to solve for this? Give us your crystal ball prediction.
yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that what may be different than in the past, and this is how there has to be a shift in mentality offensively, is a lot of what offense was saying, we're going to do X, you're going to react to it, and then it'll allow us to do Y. So if that chain is broken, then you have to just focus more on, if we want to do Y, we want to do Y, like passing the ball, let's say, or making explosive plays, passing the ball. It's just like every other, kind of innovation before that, which is we have to figure out how we can manipulate space on the football field and create more space to invaluable places, and where might we be ignoring where there is space in valuable places. I mean, if we talk about like the West Coast offense, even going back to the 1980s, they said, you know what, there's a lot of space underneath that we could be throwing the ball to that's pretty valuable. And if we can complete passes at a high enough rate, even though we're not making as much of yards per completion, that can be extremely valuable. And it's just identifying that thing. I mean, that's one of the things, though, that I think offense does have to innovate. And that's why I get frustrated with people saying, you know what? Back in the 1980s, you ran the ball a lot and teams played single high. So run the ball a lot and then you'll get single high and then you can pass it. I just think that chain is a bit broken at this point.
How much of it is defenses disguising what they're doing? Because I've heard that that's happening a lot more. So it's kind of like they're now innovating in response.
Yeah, no, I think that's been a big thing for a while. It's disguising on the back end and then also disguising on the defensive line as far as what they call simulated pressure. So guys coming up and you don't know who's coming or who isn't coming, which basically just makes offensive linemen have to dedicate themselves to multiple spots and not be as effective at whatever their eventual blocking assignment ends up being. I think it does matter. And I think it matters because there are advantageous looks defensively that you want to run certain plays. And if you don't know that pre-snap and you can't change from a run to a pass post-snap, you can't audible out after the ball has already been snapped, then it becomes more difficult. But when we talk about innovation, I mean, maybe that's something that could also be more on board. I mean, we saw in college offenses like the air raid, and even now what they're doing defensively with defensive players is we give them a little bit more autonomy to adjust to what they're seeing on the field. I mean, that's another thing, is to say, okay, they're making an adjustment post snap. Maybe we need to allow players to see what's going on post snap and change more fundamentally what the play concept is in order to take advantage of that. It's things like that, and I do think that's somewhere that the NFL can look for. But it also has coaches giving up more control in a way, and I think that's less natural to a football coach than it is to a basketball coach, or a soccer coach. You just have 11 guys that they'll kind of just figure it out on their own. It's not that way when it comes to the NFL.
When are we going to see the incorporation of laterals on a more regular basis? I feel like that is the next dimension.
Well, it's funny, Kevin Kelly, you guys know Kevin Kelly, the guy who never punts.
We also had him on our podcast. We need to get you back listening to this podcast, Kevin. I feel like there was a day when you're 1 out of 7. We have a lot of Kevin.
We have a lot of football Kevins. We believe in the strength of Kevins in football.
Yeah, we're doing an all Kevin podcast. It's called Bet the Kevin.
So he had that. That was one of his things. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a novelty above anything else. But I also think it's one of those concepts. But
wait. Why do you think
it's a novelty?
Yeah, see, this is like, because when the Lions did it this week, I was like, that is genius. We've been talking about this before. If you talk about this nature of what Kevin Kelly told us, which is the key to football, is getting the ball to the middle of the field, to your playmakers in space, like, 15 to 12 yards out, running in the direction of the goal line, as opposed to running back to the line of scrimmage. He's that thing. And the only question becomes, is this lateral as risky as people think? That lateral that happened in the Lions game was not risky at all. It was completely in space. And you can decide whether you want to lateral that ball or not based on how risky it is. So it seems like something, if you practiced, it's not that risky. And then the question becomes, it's only a novelty because no one does it, not because.
Well, I mean, it literally is.
We see toss sweeps and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I'm saying it's a novelty, and I don't mean that in that it's like something that can't be expanded. I'm just saying, if teams aren't doing it, and like you mentioned, I was just about to say, if they aren't practicing it, I mean, for instance, like, if you want to use these analogies, when it comes to passing the ball in the NFL or 3-pointers in the NBA, there's two different things, right? You start doing it more often, then you realize it should be a bigger focus of your game, so you start practicing more, and then you have like players who have been 7-footers who've been shooting threes since they were, 8 years old, who are now in the NBA, and they're better at doing it too. So it's one of those things, I think, for this also, like, you would need to dedicate practice time to it. And Theoretically, I think it sounds fantastic. I guess, if you haven't seen it work, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it because you haven't seen it work, but I guess I'd be less confident that necessarily it would work. But I think it hints also to another potential solution, quote unquote, in the NFL, which is maybe getting a little bit more comfortable with turnovers in order to get explosive plays, because the NFL, again, from 1980 until now, it's been getting shorter and shorter passes, fewer interceptions, fewer sacks, and that's starting to reverse a little bit recently with these running quarterbacks and other things. So it's kind of like the negatives have been going
Fewer
down
fumbles.
further and further and further. Yeah, fewer fumbles in the
I mean,
pocket because of that.
they used to have 2 fumbles lost on parlay cards in Las Vegas. Back in 2008.
Yeah, so all these things have shifted. So teams have become extremely uncomfortable with turnovers. But if your other options are not generating as much value, if possessions are just not worth as much as they had been in the past, you should be more comfortable with it. And I think that plays into this too. Like, teams are allergic to the potential of losing the ball. So anything that could get you an explosive play and the downside is a turnover, I think is probably undervalued in the NFL right now.
I mean, I think the thing is
So,
I don't want to say design a whole new offense, but like I feel like it involves a different way of thinking about things.
Well, I mean, I think the
well,
threat of it could come into play too, right? Like, defenses would have to, you could get more yak without pitching the ball because defenses can't all collapse on the guy who has the ball. So
Exactly.
there's a lot of stuff that could potentially go on there. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're onto something, Kevin, though, with it, which is sort of like this classic idea of risk aversion, right? Or where like people are worried that they don't want to lose the ball. And I know back when we started doing football analytics in the early 2000s, there were coaches that we talked to that would literally like just write the number of turnovers on a board and say like, this is all we need to do to win, is like have fewer turnovers than they do. And obviously that was um probably true, but also a ridiculous strategy at some level to optimize for, because like, and if it is the case that people are so focused on this, there's some level where the risk return, I mean, it's all a risk return analysis at some level, right? It's like, what is the risk versus the return on this? And people probably they're too scared of the idea of this lateral. I think this is like the new hot button for me versus Kyle Shanahan going for it on more plays and kicking field goals like it's his, like it's true love.
Yay.
So but
No, I agree. I mean, one of the things that I talked about, which is similar in some ways, it's not as novel. Sorry, I'll put that in there again, is just, I don't know, maybe we got to just throw it up deep more often sometimes, especially depending upon what the down and distance situation is. And if it's intercepted, it's intercepted. I just think, again, we're going on 4 decades of turnover rates going down. It's almost like been a free lunch for offenses to be more productive with fewer turnovers. It just really is tough to shake out of that sort of mentality, I think.
well, I mean, you can talk about like a 50-yard interception, right? And if you look at very basic, hitting game of football stuff, that's probably only a negative 1 or 2 point play, right? At some level,
Wow.
because you
Well,
give up
especially if it comes
possession.
on third down, especially if it
Yeah.
comes on third down. I mean, that's, for instance, Josh Allen, people talked about his turnovers a lot last year. His interceptions a lot last year. I think he had at least 2 interceptions that had positive EPA on the play because he threw it so far down the field and it was on like a 3rd and 12 or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely being cognizant of the expected points going into the play. So yeah, I'm not saying, throw a bunch of interceptions on 1st and 10, when you're at the 50-yard line. I'm saying in certain situations, be more willing to throw interceptions, maybe draw defensive pass interferences. I feel like I'm kind of surprised there hasn't been more of a James Hardenization of the NFL in some ways, of guys trying to draw DPIs and other things in poor situations. I mean, all these sorts of things I think could be leaned on a little bit more in the NFL.
In that situation, so if we go back to now, maybe the last topic that would be good would be talk a little bit about quarterback play. Do you think that Josh Allen is aware of that kind of thinking, and that's when he's willing to take risks? And ultimately, isn't the cheat code to fix this cover 2 thing just better quarterback play? Because ultimately, that's what you're talking about, right? You're talking about quarterbacks that can make tough passes in tight windows and can deliver the ball to a running back in space, in stride, versus like having to have them stop. And not all quarterbacks can do that. And that's ultimately where we start saying like there are these elite quarterbacks that can do this and there aren't. So is that the unlock, or is it too simple to say that?
I mean, I think the first part, yeah, I think quarterbacks have intuition, which is very strong, which is correct most of the time. But of course, it's correct most of the time. I mean, the thing is really trying to fish out when it may be incorrect. I remember there was an interview with Joe Burrow a few off seasons ago where he was talking about the fact that he has a higher sack rate. At least he used to, especially have a higher sack rate. And he said, well, I'm taking them in situations like third down where if I'm getting sacked, it's not that much of a negative versus, just punting from a few yards further. I don't do it in field goal range. I don't do it in other places. Now, I mean, unfortunately for Joe Burrow, I checked the numbers and his situational sacks are pretty much the same as everyone else's, but at least like intellectually, I think they know some of these things. So yeah, I think quarterback play is a big thing, but it also has to be combined with some sort of innovation in scheme to open up more spaces and to make it easier for them. And one thing I think maybe this is that the fact that it's been such a fast shift towards defensive, not dominance, but winning essentially the last few years, I think might also be partially caused by analytics, because when things become universal, like the spread offense offensively and the type of quarterbacks you would want, half field reads, that all that stuff kind of became a universal thing. Prospects, or a lot of new prospects do that. And now when the defense solved for that partially, now the whole NFL is in a tizzy, not knowing what to do because they don't have the counters to it because they were so universal in another way. So yeah, no, I do think better quarterback play is part of it, but we've also seen a number of years now where top quarterbacks, prospects like an Anthony Richardson, or guys who've been successful like a Jalen Hurts, would not fit that mold of, okay, this is a guy who's going to find solutions breaking down a coverage. They're more guys who would execute extremely well, something that doesn't require that and have those kind of physical traits. So yeah, we might see a shift a little bit more in that direction.
I have a theoretical question. What would happen if you had the Eli Manning, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady's of the world, like that era Ben Roethlisberger coming out of college right now? What would that look like?
Well, they wouldn't have been as successful in high school and college. That would be part of the problem. I think maybe pipeline wise, they would give offenses less answers than would some of these other quarterbacks. So maybe they would be less highly touted of prospects going forward. I guess we do have Arch Manning. I like you slipping Eli in there too. We could.
Philip Rivers. I don't believe Eli should be a Hall of Famer personally.
Okay. No, I'm just kidding. Because that's always a talk with Eli. So no, I think there is something to it. I think, I mean,
Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco.
Elite,
yeah.
Elite Joe Flacco.
Yeah.
He did have a little run last year.
Jay
although
Cutler.
he was turning the ball over like crazy.
Jay Cutler was better than Eli.
I do think we've lost a lot of quarterback talent, right? If you talk about guys who either are not in their prime anymore or are not playing anymore. At the same time, there's not a very strong correlation between that and what's happened with the NFL passing post 2020. I mean, if you look at 2020, a lot of those guys were already gone or were already semi-washed also. So my theory is like quarterback play was really, really good, driving efficiency. Then we got these spread offenses and everything were just kicking defenses' asses left and right and making it kind of easier to play quarterback. And you had guys who are really, really good at throwing the ball because they've been throwing the ball 500 times a season since they were 11 years old. And now we've going more into like the coverage reading thinking game function part of it, and we don't have those quarterbacks. So I do think that's part of it too. I mean, I still think it's a secondary thing to the defensive shift in focus and mentality and coverages and schemes, but I think it's adding to the problem essentially, and it's much more difficult also to turn a switch on offensively. I mean, you can turn a switch schematically offensively. You can't turn a switch on. We've been recruiting and optimizing for a certain type of quarterback who may not be as valuable as we thought he was going to be a few years ago.
So what, like, it's an interesting question, right? And we think about like, when I think about these like systematic changes, I always try to think about what's the root cause. So what's the root cause of this? Like, I would say that like all of our lives, I've always thought that the most athletic kid is the one that ends up being the quarterback, right? That's the general thing at any level of football up until probably what, almost college, right? In high school, it's probably the case. Um, or is it now that in college those kids are now continuing to be quarterbacks when they used to be moved to wide receiver or running back, and like there's just a value of different skill sets at the college level that ultimately is now bleeding into the NFL?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely it. I mean, you're right. At a low enough level, um, like you want the ball in the hands of your best athletes as often as possible, right? When you don't have to do pinpoint passing and things like that. So it makes sense that you have it. Yeah, I think colleges, especially higher level colleges, um, just required a higher level of passing and didn't really require rushing also, right? It's not just like you needed a passing to be successful at these colleges before, where you don't anymore. It's like you actually need to be able to rush to be successful, where you didn't need that before. Adding that optionality to the game is just such a huge deal when it comes to college offenses. That, yeah, I think that's affected the pipeline somewhat. I mean, even guys who you don't think of as being rushing quarterbacks are just tremendous athletes normally coming out of college at this point.
So like it's almost like the offensive schemes in college got so good compared to the defenses that you needed, like you could optimize on when the play breaks down and like a quarterback runs and whatnot. And so I don't know, again, like I don't know, is the answer that all of a sudden in the cover is the cover two trend, is there any trickle down into college right now, or is college behind on that?
I mean,
Meaning, like, is there going to be a need at the college level for more pinpoint passer, which will then hopefully feed back into the NFL?
I mean, I'm not a big college football expert, but I remember I've talked to some people who really follow stuff, and like the Big 12 was kind of a big place for innovation when as these trends have happened throughout the years. And what they say is, oh yeah, this is like years ago. It's already like defenses have already been kind of winning as far as how they've been running things defensively. They haven't solved the spread scheme, but they're so much better at doing it than even NFL offenses were a few years ago. And it has shifted into teams looking to run it a bit more. I don't know if it's shifted into teams looking to have pinpoint passing, because I'm not sure second or third tier colleges have access to those quarterbacks nearly as much. But defenses have already adjusted and were ahead of the curve when it came versus NFL defenses. And now NFL defenses have kind of caught up with some of those innovations that happened in college.
Rufus, you got anything else for Kevin?
No, I think this is a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Like I obviously kind of had some subjects I wanted to cover, but we went deep into this, and I think it's fascinating to think about. Tell us a little bit about where people can find your work. We can probably funnel 6 people over there.
Sure. It's unexpectedpoints.com. It's on Substack. It's a newsletter and podcast. I do a weekly podcast with Josh Hermsmeyer where we kind of review the week. And then I also do interviews with different guests. Just an interview with Cody Alexander, who is a former defensive coach. He also does some stats stuff. He actually was part of a big data bowl team a couple of years ago. So kind of his feet are in two different worlds, and he's able to bridge some of these concepts, talking about how defenses are winning and what NFL offenses can do. And then I have a schedule of stuff that comes out. I mean, one of the biggest things is I do adjustments, which is probably similar to what Rufus does, honestly, where he has game scores and try to adjust for what goes on with different games in order to use those to project going forward. Down weighting the high variance stuff, trying to figure out what's sticky or not for different performances. And then I also do quarterback projections based upon this Bayesian model I have, and then also these adjustments to quarterback efficiency based upon charting data and other sorts of data to try to parse out, which quarterbacks are playing a little bit better than what their numbers may say, and vice versa.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Kevin, and look forward to reading more of your work this season.
All right. Thanks, guys.